Good morning. This is January 28th, 2014. We're at the Jewish Community Center in Stamford, Connecticut. My name is Sidney Goldman. We will be interviewing Bertram Waller in connection with the Library of Congress Veterans Oral History Project. And now let's go to Bert. Okay. Good morning, Bert.
Good
And
morning.
We want to thank you for participating in this project, and this goes into the archives of the Library of Congress, and maybe 50 or 100 years from now, some kid doing a PhD dissertation is going to dig out your CD and learn something about the world that preceded it.
Well, they do pick some weird subjects for those.
Okay, so tell us something about your family, where they came from, how they came here, how you came to Stamford and so forth. So I'll let you give us the narrative you want.
Well, my family, my grandfather's family lived in not Russia, what's the?
Ukraine?
Ukraine, right.
Okay.
In a town called, near a town called Pliskov, halfway between Kiev and the other big city on the other side, in central Ukraine anyway, and very unique for Jews. They had a cattle raising operation, which was strictly against the Russian the Tsarist Russian law. It just happened that my great-grandfather, my grandfather's father, who served in the Russian army and was discharged, a high officer. I usually say general, but family, who knows about family exaggerations. Anyway, he was given a special dispensation by the Tsar to be an honorary non-Jew and to enjoy the pleasures of being a citizen. And so he acquired this cattle ranch or cattle farm, and he bred cattle. In doing so, he traveled all over the Middle East, and so my mother, as a child, enjoyed certain things that were not common in that part of in that country, or especially among Jews. Things that he would bring back from the Middle East and so forth. I don't want to go on, or
Okay,
this can take a whole hour.
How did the family come here? And who came first?
Well, the family, I guess for anybody that knows anything about that period, things were pretty tough for Jews. What would happen is the Tsar's army would come through about once a year and kidnap all the boys that appeared to be 14 or above, and take them into army service. Many never came back. Parents never knew what happened to them. In my great-grandfather's case, he stayed in the army, became an officer, blah, 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 and returned, took up cattle ranching. Where was I?
You were going to tell us how the family came here.
Oh, yeah, okay. The between the Tsar's army, which arriving, which usually meant a certain amount of killing, and besides the kidnapping and raping and so forth, and then later on the Red armies would come through. The Tsar's white armies, so-called, considered all Jews to be communists and persecuted them for that. And then the White Army assumed all Jews to be capitalists, or whatever the names that they had, not capitalists, for believers in Tsarism, let's say, or anti-communism. So whoever came through, it was things were bad. And at some point during the revolution, they realized that, and my grandfather at one point was killed by one of the armies, and a grandmother by the other army. So the family, such as it was, which included, by the way, my mother's mother was his third wife.
She was what now?
His third wife.
Oh.
Grandfather's third wife.
Yeah.
The other two had died, I presume, from overwork.
Okay.
And
So who came over here?
So,
Who was the?
that was to precede that the losing my what was I going to say?
Was it your grandfather who came here first? No, he was killed.
Grandfather. He was
so
killed.
your father came here?
My mother was a child at the time, the youngest of a large number of children, and from previous wives and so forth. Some were adults. Matter of fact, the oldest children had left home and married and had children before my mother was born.
Hmm.
So she had nieces and nephews who were older than her. Well, anyway, at some point they knew they had to leave, or they'd all be dead. The revolution was on, and so forth. So what they did was the eldest took what resources there were and moved to America or Canada and earned money and sent money back for the others, and they came more or less in reverse, in age order. My mother was the second youngest of the batch, and when she came, revolution was on, and the war was on in Europe.
Which are you talking about the revolution?
The Russian Revolution.
1917?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, actually, it was on for about 1900.
Yeah.
But more episodically, it didn't turn into armies until 1917.
So when your mother arrived?
Well, she was 16 years old, and given her younger brother, who was a few years, still a child, in her care, and they had to make their way across Europe without being on public roads or taking public transportation. So basically, they were just running through back roads and avoiding police and apprehension all across Europe. Finally made her way to Belgium, and there was a Jewish agency there that got her a place on a ship and gave her and she came to America. Not at that time they had quotas, and the Russian quotas were always overflowing, filled. She came, I think on a Belgian quota. They switched identities back and forth.
Did she come to New York, or?
She came to New York, yes, and had a good number of brothers and sisters who already lived here, and she married here.
And did she marry an American or a European?
Well, she married. No answer is straight in this business. She married a man who was an American, but who had actually been brought here as a 1-year-old baby from Poland. So he spoke Brooklyn.
Okay. So now, where did your mother or your parents grow up, and where did you grow up?
Oh, my mother.
When they came here, I meant.
Well, in the Bronx. I was born in the Bronx, where my parents lived, and they separated when I was about 5 years old, and got a Jewish divorce, so-called a get, and never got a legal divorce. Not that she didn't try.
And did you stay in touch with your father?
No.
No more.
No. My mother took great care to poison me about him and hate him. She was afraid that, when they separated, they fought over the kid, me, and the judge appointed her to be my guardian, and he said something like, "That's okay. When he grows up, he'll be mine." And this scared her to death, frightened her to death, and she spent my entire life telling me about what a horrible person he was, and so forth. So I hate being an obedient son. I hated him with a passion.
Okay, so tell us something about yourself growing up in the Bronx.
In the Bronx, the usual Bronx bringing up, to get to in a mixed neighborhood, no matter where you went, as a Jewish kid, you were had people coming after trying to beat you up and so forth. So I learned to run. I carried stones in my pocket. My mother used to complain bitterly about having to repair my pockets.
Did you go to Dewood, Clinton?
No.
Where'd you go to high school?
But by high school, some details missing. I was living in Queens, so I went to something called Woodrow Wilson.
Okay, so now let's get to the point, if we can, where you entered the military. Tell us the circumstances then, and what year, and so forth.
Well, in 1946, the war was technically still on, although the hostilities had ended. So by law or technically, I served in wartime. And at that time, the troop ships were coming back from Europe, loaded with soldiers clamoring to be discharged, and the Army was actually very short-handed. So they were desperate for more bodies. I'm blind in my right eye and should not have been drafted, but they looked the other way, and after desperately trying to get me to say what are we holding up there, they finally wrote down my vision as 20/200. They could have said 22,000.
Yeah. Were you in the Army?
Yes, I was in
Okay,
the
so-
Army. The only, with my vision, the only place they could put me in was the medical corps, where I didn't have to have rifle training. You know, because in the Army you're supposed to shoot with the right eye, not the left.
Where did you go for basic training and thereafter specialized training?
Well, after initially going to Fort Dix, which I'll bring that back if given time, where you know, you're given uniforms and a serial number and so forth, and the shots and so forth. I was sent to Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C., and me and a whole bunch of other recruits were given basic training right on the grounds there. And they brought in a basic training type sergeant for the job, and I guess he did a good job. Taught us to march and step,
And were you trained as a medic? Was that it?
yes,
Uh-huh.
it was standard basic training except for combat.
Okay. Now you said something about Fort Dix. You'll get back to that. So just in case we don't, what would you like to tell us about Fort Dix?
Well, at Fort Dix, we were put in a section which had empty barracks, which was once used for recruits, and housed there while and we're supposed to wait for people to come pick us up to take us, for one thing, and to shots or for to watch VD movies and various other lovely things the Army did for you in your first days. But in fact, what it was is that there were sergeants all over the fort, all over the base, who knew that whenever they needed dirty jobs to be done, would drive a bus over and pick up some so-called volunteers to go do, bring garbage cans from the mess hall to the dump, or to pick up cigarette butts off a parade ground, and various other lovely Army things. So once I realized I was a sitting duck in that barracks, I wandered out of the area. So walking around the base, I found a golf course, an Army golf course. So I walked in through you had to go through this little doghouse where there was, of course, a sergeant sitting at a desk. And I asked, can anybody come? Some stupid question like that. And he handed me a golf bag and a big bag of golf balls and told me and pointed to the back door which enters out onto the green. So I had never held a golf club in my hands or had a lesson, so I stepped up to the edge of the green, or whatever they call it, where you tee off, the tee, of course, to the tee, put the ball down, picked up the golf club like it was a baseball bat. That's all I knew how to swing, and I wailed away at it, and the ball took a bad spin and curved, took a mean curve and went into the woods beside the fairway. So I walked down to go into the woods to look for the ball, and out pops a German in full German uniform with holding the ball, smiling, clicks his heel, comes to attention, clicks his heels, throws the ball on the fairway, and goes back into hiding in the woods. And as it turns out, the base had become a German prisoner camp, and the prisoners had to just stay out of the way and do some little job, and that was his job. So I made my way around the golf course until I got tired of it, and wherever I went, there was some German prisoner carrying the ball back out. That's the way the Army plays golf.
Well, okay, that's better than they're coming out with a gun, right?
Well, that's right.
Now, how old were you when you
I have to emphasize that I was the war years, through the war years, from 39 to 46, I was from age 12 to 18. And these were formative years where you believe everything you see and told, and I was subjected to war propaganda about what terrible people the Germans were. As it turned out, they did worse things than we thought. That's another story.
How old were you when you actually were drafted into the service?
18.
And how long did you stay in the service?
2 years.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so after your training let's say this, during those years in the Army and your training, did you encounter any degree of anti-Semitism?
No actual anti-Semitism, although but one event still rankles me. My mother sent me a package, a Passover package, and I took it to the barracks, and on my bunk started opening it up, and the other soldiers, most of whom were Southerners and had never seen Jews before, were very curious, and they gathered around as I opened it up and took out all these, boxes of matzahs and one thing and another, and one object that came out of the box was a bottle of sacramental wine. So one of these Southerners grabbed the wine and ran with it, and I ran after him, and while running he opened it up and drank it, and finally threw the empty bottle aside, and but
Okay, so let's go back to
Yeah.
Walter Reed.
yeah.
You finished training, basic, you got your medic training. Where did you go? Where was the rest of your military service?
Well, at the end of training, one attends, at that point, I was given an appointment 3 days hence for an interview at which I'd get assignment. And while and the Army is nothing but scuttlebutt, you know. For 3 days I walked around and asked about it, and I found out that there are only 3 classes of things that could be assigned. Is the minority ones were if you had a usable skill like X-ray technician. You got those were the plum assignments. The other one was clerk typist, and the third one, which was the great majority, was what we called ward boy, which is bedpan jockey, and pus and blood and pain, and not your pain, presumably their pain, and so forth. And nothing was more objectionable to me, more scary than to get involved in that. So I had a couple of days to learn to be a clerk typist, and I got the Army manual on typing, and in 2 days learned to type well enough to pass the clerk typist exam. I walked in, passed the exam, and was labeled a clerk typist. My first assignment, or my assignment then, was to the neuropsychiatric section, where my clerk typist skills were used only for the morning report. That's all. Aside from that, I had the keys to the front door, which were always locked, of course, neuropsychiatric hospital, and I let people in and out, and was given the night shift from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., 30 days a month.
Now, what you're telling us all took place on the Walter Reed grounds?
Oh yeah, that was one of the buildings on the
Yeah.
Walter Reed. It's a huge campus.
Yeah. What other assignments did you have in the Army?
Well, while a patient in the hospital, I walked in. Sorry, everything has a story. I walked into one of the occupational therapy labs, which was a photo lab, and I walked in, and the ever-present sergeant at a desk in charge handed me a camera, said, shoot up this roll, come back, I'll show you how to develop and print it. So I walked around the base with my olive drab colored Kodak 35 camera, took pictures, brought it back. He showed me how to do what needed to be done in the photo lab, and I continued with the camera work during the 6 weeks that I was in the hospital as a patient. And about toward the end of it, he told me that the public relations office needed a photographer, and he thought that I could manage to fill the bill there. And by that time I was anxious not to go back to the neuropsychiatric section, which was a pretty stressful assignment, aside from the front door key. And I won't get started on those stories.
Right. Now, Walter Reed was very high profile
Very much so.
installation there. What exposure did you have to celebrities, high-ranking people?
Well,
and so
as a
forth?
matter of fact, as a photographer, I had quite a bit of exposure to celebrities. Walter Reed competed with the Naval Hospital to treat senators and generals, you know, and so forth. So I got to and to attend a number of those interviews and photograph the interviewees. And one time I went down to the White House Rose Garden and to accompany some patients who were getting medals pinned on them by Harry Truman. And Truman shook my hand. I was standing up behind a wheelchair, behind the sainted veteran. And I got to meet General, you ever hear of General Pershing? He was a patient, full-time patient. Walter Reed was his nursing home at that time, and one had to be very careful of walking past his door, because he would yell, "Hey, soldier, come on in here." The poor guy was lonely, you know, being in a room alone after a lifetime of being attended to by a whole army, and he would talk your ear off about how he outsmarted the Germans here and there, and you know, his army career. And meanwhile, you know, you had some place you had to be. So I learned to sort of run past the door, his door.
Now, as you look back, how did being in the Army affect you for the rest of your life? Well, you know.
Well, the main thing it did is I was a very immature 18-year-old and had done very poorly in school and had been and did not qualify for an academic high school, and was put into what they called a technical high school, where you learn trades, and was not, of course, not qualified for college, nor did I at the time think that I was qualified for college. I mean, aside from the academic part. So, but my 2 years in the Army gave me a little time to mature and to find out that I could learn things and that I could excel at certain things, and came out with a different attitude. And after getting out of the Army, I received, I'll call it a high school equivalency, and attended college, studied engineering, which I loved.
Where did you go to school?
University of New Mexico for the final 3 years.
Did you graduate as an engineer?
Yeah,
With a specialty in what?
mechanical engineering.
Let me back up a minute. When you were 18 and you went in the service, any siblings in the family who saw military service?
Only child. I'm an only child.
Okay.
I guess that answers your question.
Yeah, definitively. Okay, yes, okay. So, so when you were discharged, did you give any thought to staying in longer in the service?
Oh, well, the office I worked for, which is the public relations office for Walter Reed, did a real job of trying to force me to re-enlist. You know, they needed the body, and I told them no, I want to go to college. But they didn't stop asking me or telling me of all sorts of dire things that would happen if I didn't re-enlist. The Army has its ways of applying pressure.
To what extent did you stay in touch with any friends you made in the Army?
I didn't stay in touch with anybody. One of my co-workers in the neuropsychiatric section was the son of the publisher of the Boston Globe. He didn't have my luck. He was a ward boy, or in the neuropsychiatric section, that makes you a wrestler.
Yeah. Now, how did you come to Stanford? Give us a little chronology when you finished New Mexico and where you went and where you are now.
Well, when I moved from New Mexico, I moved back to New York and lived there. And then my wife had some friends, lived in Rockland County, and we used to go there for holidays. And another of their friends, who we met every holiday up there, and lived in Stanford. And he kept telling us, why don't you come up and see Stanford? And you'll love it. You'll move to, and after about 10 years, I bit. I came and we moved to Stanford.
And when was that?
In 1970.
Now, who were you working for all this time?
An engineering firm in New York called Cosentini Associates.
And what kind of projects were you on?
Cosentini specialized in big projects. They had various groups that were subspecialties, hospitals. One group did hospitals, one group did high-rise buildings, and another group did college campuses and so forth. Mostly big stuff and for very prestigious architects.
Well,
High-rise to them was 80 or 90 floors or above.
well, now, if you look back all these years, what enduring lessons or effects or influences did your military years have on you?
Gave me a certain amount of discipline, I suppose. The Army did beat discipline into me. Going back to Fort Dix, one of the ways they found volunteers to do those dirty jobs is they'd line everybody up and ask, "What's your serial number?" if you hadn't memorized your serial number, you got taken for the dirty jobs. You got sent out to the truck or the bus and ended up picking up doo-doo or whatever dirty jobs they couldn't get regular soldiers to do.
Now, is there anything, considering that...
Oh, so anyway, after my first such assignment, I studied my serial number. I have and memorized it, and I haven't forgotten it since.
Nor have I forgotten mine. Okay. What else might you want to tell us, considering that your story is going to be posterity? What might we have talked about that we didn't, or what would you like to say? Tough question, I know, but
Well,
we don't want this to end without afterwards just saying, why didn't I bring up
you're
such and
warning me
such?
it's about to end, so I'll tell. How about a dumbhead story? Okay. One night I'm sitting there at my desk near the entrance to the hospital, and somebody knocks on the front door, and I go to the door, and it turns out it's a second lieutenant who just got his gold bar, brand new officer, and was full of how important he was. And he told me that the patient, it was summer, so that the windows were open, the bars were still closed. Patient on the second floor had gotten his attention and said he was being starved to death up there and was being given no food or water, but especially no water, and he was deep. And he was dying up there, and nothing's more convincing than a psychiatric patient, I can tell you, who believes what he's telling you. And so I tried to talk the lieutenant, and he insisted that he be brought some water, and that the patient be brought some water in his presence. So I tried to tell him, these guys, this was a neuropsychiatric section. Those guys were all that had the windows up front were in isolation rooms and were mostly violent and whatever, telling him stories out of pure imagination, you know. So he wasn't going to be easily convinced, and he insisted. So and he pulled his rank. I'm ordering. I tried to tell him to call the major who was in charge of the NP section, and nothing would do. So I took him upstairs and filled a cup with water, opened the door to the isolation room. He took the water, gave it to the patient. The patient took the water cup, threw the water back in his face, and he came out wetted and with his first lesson. First lesson in the Army.
Sounds like you had an interesting career, and we thank you for participating.
You mean I'm finished?
I think we're finished, yes. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting.